Hello everyone, this is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. So in today's episode, we're going to discuss mental health and particularly the effect of the ketogenic diet on a number of mental health conditions or disorders, including bipolar, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and others. So our guest has her PhD in psychology, and she's specialized in keto diets and depression. She's an associate fellow of the British Psychological Society. She is the founder of Integrative Ketogenic Research and Therapies. Dr. Erin Louise Bellamy, welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to chat with you today. It's going to be great.
Dr. Bellamy, how would you like me to address you during the conversation?
You can just call me Erin. It's all good.
Erin, I love that name, by the way. So if I had another daughter, my daughter's name is Helen, but if I had another one, I'd definitely call her Erin. It's
Helen
always
and
been one of
Erin.
my favorites. Okay.
Brilliant.
Right. Erin, Integrative Ketogenic Research and Therapies. That's actually ikrt.org. I'll put the link below so people can just access it directly to find out more about your work. But what do we mean by integrative ketogenic research and therapies?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for asking. I think I should probably have thought a little bit longer and harder about coming up with a shorter name. It is a tongue twister, but I think every word in that is relevant, in that I'm here to kind of join the research side of ketogenic diets and ketogenic mechanisms and ketogenic research, join that up with the clinical application of ketogenic diets and fasting protocols and the like. And so as we're going to get into today, we're going to understand, how the ketogenic diet influences different mental health conditions and physical conditions as well. But as you know, and as probably lots of your listeners and viewers will know, there are a lot of other things that you also have to consider in terms of lifestyle changes and things like this. So what I wanted to do with IKRT is show people that I'm trying to bring the research and the clinical practice together, but also that it's not just about the ketogenic diet, solely about the ketogenic diet. There's more than one way to get into ketosis. There's more than one thing to consider depending on the individual and depending on the health issues that they're facing and depending on who they are as a person and what their life has been like up until now. And so really that's where the integrative part comes in. It's really just pointing the finger at it's more than just the research, the clinical practice, and the keto diet. And it's kind of bringing everything together into the one place.
Well, that's a wonderful explanation. So what got you into this research?
I think everybody actually has a bit of a backstory. If you go back and listen to your other podcasts, everybody's got a strange way of coming here, ending up in this position. And so mine is a little strange as well, in that, my background is psychology. Some people may already know this of me, and I had wanted to become a clinical psychologist in the UK. But on my journey towards being a clinical psychologist, I was working with a lot of people who had, varying levels of depression, anxiety, ADHD, but then all the way up to really severe schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disease. And I just didn't see people getting better. I could see people getting better perhaps briefly, if they were really in crisis, but I didn't see people getting better in the long term. And so a combination of my curiosity and research skills, along with my kind of passion for diets and understanding nutrition, which was a personal passion of mine anyway, kind of digging into the research around low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic diets, and looking at whether or not there was any research for mental health. Back in 2015, 2016, there really wasn't anything. There were just one or two studies from back in the 60s, 70s, just before antipsychotic medications came out. And that was it. it was a little bit like a tumbleweed situation. There was nothing else since then. And so I, I went on a personal journey with the ketogenic diet for myself. I lost some weight. I felt much better mentally and physically, though I've never really struggled with my mental health. I just felt clarity and a sense of calm. And so I thought, well, you know what? Some of these research studies from back in the 60s and 70s look quite promising, but why is nobody doing that research now? What happened? And if it looked so promising back then, maybe we could, revitalize that and revisit it again and see if we could maybe find an alternative or an adjunct to the mental health treatments that are currently out there. Maybe it could help people. And so what I did was I then approached a university to see if I could do a part-time PhD so that I could really dig in and do the research myself, to see what would come of it. Could this help people? Could it help the general population? Could it help people with mental health conditions? And so yeah, that's what I did. I just got stuck in, and that was back in 2016, and then I've just kind of finished just last year, 2023. So a bit of a long journey, but I did it.
Wonderful. I'm sure it was worthwhile. So we'll talk about the research in detail.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that the ketogenic diet isn't new in medical literature, certainly. I mean, it goes back 150 years probably, and it was first used in epilepsy treatment, and then, of course, diabetes as well. So why do you think there was no research in its application in mental health disorders?
It's an interesting one. I think there are probably a lot of different contributing factors. Back in 2015, 2016, like you mentioned, type 2 diabetes was the focus. There was a lot of research coming through positive, showing that the low carb and ketogenic diet can help that. And it's interesting because a lot of people who have type 2 diabetes may have poor mood as well, and they were seeing improvements there. And yet the research wasn't really shifting to look at the mental health component. And I'm not quite sure. I think the main factors that I think had a role in this is that, when that research was done back in the 60s and 70s, like I said earlier, antipsychotic medications and other medications hadn't really been introduced properly. But then as soon as they were introduced, they were straight into the inpatient units and the community settings. And, even today, people are quite regularly prescribed different types of medications to help. And I think because of that, people then moved away from the idea that perhaps a nutritional approach could help. And so because there wasn't the exact research to show, yes, this does help depression or does help bipolar disorder, I think people just went straight ahead and said, okay, you know what, take this medication or do this therapy, because there's XYZ research behind it. And perhaps it's an easier thing to do when you're not feeling so great, is to take the medication or do the therapy. And so that's the way I kind of look at it. Whereas, like you mentioned, we've got hundreds of years of evidence, as far back as the 1920s with it, ketogenic diet and the focus around epilepsy. And then even prior to that, we have research on fasting and things like this. So it's not new, like you said. And, we know more about this now, the ketogenic diet and the mechanisms, than we do of any other diet. But yet we just haven't focused on it. And so I think it is a couple of different factors coming together. But at the same time, what's interesting is doctors and healthcare professionals will still say, you need to look after your diet, you need to eat healthy, you need to do this, don't you know that diet is good for your mental health, it's going to make you feel better. But what does that look like?
Yes.
And how do you do that? And is there one diet that may be more beneficial for your specific symptoms than another diet? And that's kind of where we are now. There's a lot of confusion, and we're trying to kind of make sense of it all, I think.
Erin, let's talk about your research. So what was the focus of it, and what did you find out?
Yeah. So I have a couple of slides that I'm going to share with you, actually, because I think it will help us kind of navigate the journey of the PhD. So for thinking about my research, then the first thing that I'd like to kind of give a bit of a background to is when I started looking at mental health conditions and the ketogenic diet and trying to see which condition I'd like to start with, I started to see, are there mechanisms that I'd like to look at specifically? Maybe I want to look at inflammation, maybe that's an issue, or perhaps it's oxidative stress, maybe that might be a contributing issue. And so as I dug into the research, I found over 53 different mechanisms of depression, so different underlying mechanisms of depression and their counter effects with ketones. So in other words, I found that, for example, C-reactive protein is an inflammatory marker. I found that that was increased in some people with depression. And then on the flip side, I found that the ketogenic diet, through the mechanisms of the ketones, they can reduce the CRP and bring it back down to normal levels. So I found myself in a little bit of a black hole because I found all of these issues and mechanisms in depression. And then I found all of these kind of counter effects of the ketones. And I really didn't know what to do. And so I thought, okay, let me take a step back and look at this on a wider scale. What I'm ultimately trying to do is see, is the application of the ketogenic diet going to help people and their mental health? Is it ultimately going to make them feel better and therefore have a higher quality of life? So I stepped away from the idea that I would look at any individual mechanisms or try and understand that, because I'm not a biochemist. I'm a psychologist. I like learning about behavior. And so then I decided I would look specifically at the application of the diet and to see what would happen with people. And so here we can see this is a breakdown of my research study design. Really simply, what I had was a randomized control trial, which looked at the low carbohydrate diet versus a ketogenic diet versus a control, or people who are just going to continue their diet as normal. That was my main study. And then I had a smaller study, a qualitative study, where I interviewed those people who followed the ketogenic diet specifically, just to follow up and see, what was their true experience? How did they manage their lifestyle obstacles? What came up? What was difficult? What was easy? What did they experience? So that I could really understand, first of all, if I had captured everything in my randomized control trial, and also just to give a little bit of a narrative to the numbers, because I find that often we look at research papers or statistics and it says 60% of people feel this way or 80% of people feel that way. But I like listening to the stories and listening to the anecdotes and reading those, because I think we can connect with those a lot more. Mm-hmm. And so with my randomized control trial, I had those 3 groups. And then within that, I broke up my participants into people who were classed as healthy and then people who were classed as depressed. And I used a psychological scale to determine that. And then along 24 weeks, I checked in with people every 6 weeks, and I gave them a whole host of psychological questionnaires and measures, just to kind of capture where they were at each point. And so things that I looked at were stress, anxiety, depressive symptoms, self-compassion, body appreciation, all of these things that we, as part of our daily life, we think about this, we're living it. And I wanted to capture those over that period of time. And so when we look at the dietary composition, I had to make sure that the low carbohydrate composition was different, very different to the ketogenic diet composition, because I didn't want anybody overlapping. I didn't want people who were low carb falling into keto, keto falling into low carb. So the low carb group, they were capped at about 90 to 130 grams of carbohydrates per day, and the ketogenic was less than 50. So for your viewers and your listeners, a ketogenic diet, for us to move into a state of ketosis and start to create those ketones, usually we're looking at about 20 grams of carbohydrates per day, right? I gave people a little bit of buffer. And also this is 8-9 years ago now. And so the research then was looking at about 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates. It wasn't really as low as 20 and below. But you can see there's quite a difference between the 50 and the 90. They didn't have any cap on how much they could eat. The main focus was just to keep those carbs within that range so that we could, keep people who are in ketosis and then people who are more low carb. The most interesting part, the research results. So in the low carb group, what was most interesting is people who followed the low carbohydrate approach found improvements in anxiety, stress, negative affect, and depressive symptoms. So this is all within a 6-month period. Within 12 weeks, the anxiety, stress, and negative affect, and then at the 24 weeks, the 6-month mark, improvements in depressive symptoms. Now, that's significant improvements in all of these aspects, just from the low carb approach. So the 90 to 130 grams per day. This is not ketosis. It's not a ketogenic diet. It's low carb. With the ketogenic group, I didn't find any significant improvements, which struck me as interesting. I wasn't expecting that. You would think, okay, low carb, you see these improvements, so less carbs, you might see even greater improvements. But I didn't find that. And one could jump and think, oh, well, that's because the ketogenic diet doesn't work. You could just go low carb and that'll be fine. But actually, when we take things apart and we look at the method and the design, what I found was quite a lot of people dropped out of the low carb and the ketogenic interventions. And so the numbers of people left in that ketogenic group at the end were quite small. And so it was very difficult to really take any meaningful results from that. And so that got me thinking, well, the ketogenic diet, surely you would expect there to be more improvements, but maybe there's some issue. Let's take a closer look. So I carried out a dropout study and I recontacted everybody who dropped out. And I said, why did you drop out? What went wrong? What did you like? What was the issue? And the main aspects or the main factors that they pointed to were the diet was a bit tricky to stick to, or that they had some change in their life. So some people got pregnant, some people had a change in life circumstance, that type of thing. Fine. But the diet being tricky was interesting to me. So I thought, okay, let's have a look at the qualitative. So I interviewed those 9 people on the ketogenic diet to see, how was it? What did you find good? What did you find bad? And really, the results of that were quite astounding. Every single person who I interviewed had an incredible reaction to the ketogenic diet, incredible change in how they were before compared to after in both physical and mental health. So this confused me even more, right? I'm wondering what is going on here. Why is it not coming up in the RCT results? It must be because of those small numbers. So here you can see these are the results of the qualitative study. So the psychological improvements, we've got things like improved self-esteem, motivation, a positive outlook on life, a feeling and a sense of control over decisions, over, day-to-day activities, things like that, better concentration and confidence, sense of reward. And to me, the most astounding was an improved or a greater meaning in life. There were, people who were saying that before they started this, they couldn't get up in the morning. They didn't have any drive. They just didn't really know what to get up for or what to do. A lot of people were just kind of stuck. Some people were kind of middle-aged and, their children had left the nest and they just didn't really know what their purpose was anymore. And yet within that 12 to 24 weeks, they were saying, I've refound that purpose. I've got my gusto back. I've got my mojo back. I feel good. I feel like I can just go out and do the things that I wanted to do, which to me was just absolutely incredible to hear and actually quite moving. And then also we've got the physical improvements, which I shouldn't skip over. But but my passion is the psychological side. So the physical improvements that you and I know very well. So reduction in weight, reduction in hunger and cravings, a reduction in pain medication, which I thought was very interesting. So people coming off pain medications that they've been on for a very long time, and then improved digestion, sleep, skin, energy, that type of thing. So when we look at the randomized control trial and the stats and the data, and we see that the ketogenic diet didn't come up significant there, I think what we can see from the qualitative is if it's done correctly and if you stick with it, there's a group of people here that are seeing significant improvements. So, what do we do about the people who didn't stay on? What do we do about the people who didn't get those benefits? What can we learn from that? And one of the most interesting things was I thought that people who maybe had lower mood and more depressive symptoms, I thought they would be the first people to drop out. I thought, okay, it might get too difficult for them. Perhaps it'll be too overwhelming.
That makes
But
sense.
actually what I found was the complete opposite.
Wow.
So the people who, were the lowest in mood and had the most depressive symptoms, they actually stayed on for the duration, which tells me that, perhaps they're getting something from this, whether it be, connection, or maybe they're getting purpose from doing something and taking responsibility and seeing, improved or positive changes, or there is something coming from this diet that is really giving them, a sense of well-being. And I think that's what we're starting to see, your viewers, your listeners, the people that you talk to and you work with as well, we're seeing that in people. They're getting this sense of well-being from applying this diet. And it doesn't have to be the ketogenic. It can start with a low carb. And then if things are not improving, you can bring it down to the ketogenic side, and see if you can get a response there. So that's a little bit of an overview, I suppose, actually a long overview, sorry, of the research and the results. But hopefully it gives you a sense of, what I did, why I did it, and what I kind of came to in the end.
Thank you. Do we need the screen now, Erin?
Don't think so. I think that's it. I'll go over this one and this one, I think, if that's okay with you.
Let's go over that, and then I have a number of questions.
Yeah, sure. So the next thing is something I wanted to share with your viewers and listeners is the evidence, because now, thanks to, there's some funding coming through for clinical trials, and the research really now is pedal to the metal. There's a lot of research coming through and being done around ketogenic diets and mental health conditions. And so just to kind of give an update to people on where we are right now, we have evidence for bipolar disorder, for schizophrenia, for schizoaffective disorder, which is schizophrenia with a mood component, for anxiety, depression, even addiction and alcohol and withdrawal, and then also for eating disorders, so anorexia nervosa and binge eating disorder. So we have evidence for the ketogenic diet and the application of that for these conditions, and more research is coming through. And then just going back to my research results, one of the things that I wanted to touch on is once I kind of finished everything and brought everything together, I was thinking about what are the pillars, or what are the main areas that people need to focus on in order to make this work. And these will come as no surprise to anybody, okay? But it really does come down to education and knowing and understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. Lifestyle and overcoming, or having the ability to overcome any lifestyle obstacles that you might face. For example, going to your granddaughter's birthday party, or going on holiday and an all-you-can-eat cruise, that type of thing. How do you manage that? And then finally, the support, finding the support either through your family and friends or through professionals that can give you that support to kind of navigate your way through this. And so really they're the three main areas that I think that people need to have in order to make this work long term. So if there's any takeaways from my work, I think this would probably be it. This is a great place to start and a great couple of things to consider.
Well, thank you for that. I loved your summary: lifestyle, education, support. I often talk about these things on this channel as well, and with my guests too. And we all understand the importance of support. And as you said, family support or support of your loved ones. And not everyone gets that, unfortunately. However, we encourage people to follow support groups on social media, of all places,
Yeah.
because there are people just like you who are
Mhm.
maybe ahead of you, who've started that journey, who can share their experiences, who can give you more expert advice than you would get from your healthcare professional or your family member. So if you can't find support in your immediate network, look online. I mean, look online anyway.
Mm, yeah,
Because
exactly.
and follow groups, support groups where people
Mhm.
are doing the same thing. So I think it all comes down to having a conviction,
Mhm.
making up your mind. This is something I want to try for the
Mhm.
next 6 months. And what
Exactly.
6 months in the big
Time's
picture
gonna
of
go by
life?
anyway.
It's really nothing. So I like that. So support is in, and of course education. And this is what you and I are trying to do, coming out and putting the information out. This
Mhm.
information is no longer behind paid walls, right?
No,
It's out
no, not anymore.
there. Not anymore. Access the information.
Yeah.
Um, right. Let's come back to the. I mean, it's great that you did RCT, right? I mean, you couldn't have run a better sort of format of research than an RCT.
Mhm.
Had to be an RCT, which gives it validity. Okay, so obviously the carbs were set.
Mhm.
How did you monitor the carb counting? How did you make sure people were they all using the same app, perhaps?
Mhm. Exactly.
Count their
So
carbs?
yeah. So this was back in the days when ketone blood monitors and continuous ketone monitors and the likes were not non-existent really. I think the Keto Mojo had just come out, but participants were using the urine ketone sticks, which we now know they're not great in terms of validity. They're not great in terms of telling you how deep in ketosis you are. They just kind of give you a binary in or out. Do I have ketones or do I not have ketones? So participants did have those. I did have access to a small number of Keto Mojos, but they were not actually included in the study in the end because there were some issues logistically with getting those out to people in time. However, they were encouraged through their videos to track their food to make sure that they were sticking within the right grams. They had kind of weekly videos that they were following to make sure that they were following it in the correct manner. And so one of the limitations, I suppose, of this is the fact that we don't have those objective measures. In an ideal situation, and if it was to be done again, definitely everybody would have a Keto Mojo or everybody would have a continuous ketone monitor so that we could monitor those ketones over time and really pinpoint, yes, you are definitely at the level that you need to be. And then we can, review the results as a result of that. So that is a limitation in that respect. But having said that, I think with the tracking that they were doing and the education that they had, then they should have been able to be in the right ballpark. And that's why I had those two groups, the 90 to 130 and then the less than 50, because it's quite yourself, it's quite a considerable difference between the two. So people definitely should have been able to keep themselves in either group.
So coming back to carb counting, how were you making sure they were counting their carbs correctly? Were they counting their total carbs? And also, did you tell them these are the carbs you can have, like carbs from your zucchinis, as the Americans would say, like the courgettes and the
Mhm.
cucumbers, and you cannot have carbs from bread and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So within the program, because it was all online, there were a series of educational videos, and in each video it would take them through like, this is what you can have, this is what you can't have, these are the carbohydrate differences in the two. Here's what you can do to swap out. So if you really like bread, you can have something else. If you really like pasta, you can have zucchini or courgette noodles, those types of things. So it educated them on the swaps that they could make and how to make sure that they were keeping themselves in the right level. They also had the ability within the online platform to track their food there, but then also when I reviewed the results afterwards, a lot of them used apps like Chronometer, MyFitnessPal, and a couple of other calorie counting type apps on their phones. And so though that wasn't consistent across the groups, and though we probably have a couple of things to say about some of these apps in terms of accuracy, generally speaking, because they were focused more so on whole foods, their carbohydrates should have been low enough. So, back then there weren't that many keto products, should we say. So it wasn't that, yes, you can have this keto product and that keto product, and then you find out that it's not really keto at all. It was very much, out with the bread, in with the eggs, out with the pasta, in with the vegetables, that type of thing. So it was more whole food swaps, which I think is quite encouraging because it means that there's less room for error. Because once you get rid of the ultra processed foods, and once you get rid of the sneaky sugars, and you move yourself over to vegetables and meats and fats, you're not far off. Even if you're a little bit over, you're not that far off. And the other thing is, within that ketogenic group as well, having that reduction in appetite would have probably meant that a lot of them had lower hunger, which we did record, lower hunger in general. So there's a really good indicator, I think, as you're probably aware, of whether I'm in ketosis or not, because you just have very little hunger throughout the day and very few cravings.
I know your focus was obviously more on carbohydrates and limiting the carbohydrates or setting them to certain ranges.
Yeah.
And you left them to eat as much fat and protein as they wanted. I'm just interested if everyone was eating animal proteins and fats, or were there any vegans, vegetarians in the group?
Yeah, it was a really nice mix. I think one of the things, when you think of a randomized control trial, you often think of a white box situation, very clinical, very applied. And I think mine was more, because it was embedded in the community, it kind of had greater ecological value in that it was reaching people in their real life day-to-day situations. So people were vegetarian, people were omnivores, people were vegans, people were obviously gluten-free, but they were following a gluten-free approach, or maybe they were dairy-free, and it was a really good mix. And then alongside that, it was also a really good mix demographically of people across the UK from all different backgrounds, all different areas. And so I think when you look at that on the wider scale, it gives you a really good indication of whether or not this is possible for people, which it does seem to be, at least at the low carb level.
I don't know if you looked at what the mechanism is that's obviously so positively impacting people's life. Even with a low carbohydrate diet obviously showed very positive
Yeah.
results. What's the mechanism there? Is it the elimination of processed foods, or is it really the higher fat content? Is it the nutrient density of the foods? Because once you've eliminated the carbohydrates, of course, what is the exact mechanism? Or is it the availability of ketones in the body as opposed to glucose? What is the mechanism, or is it all of these combined?
I wish I could say it was one, and perhaps one day we might be able to pinpoint one, but I think it's all of the above. Because if we look at the research and we look at clinicians who are also doing this, and we look at people who are leading the way in this area, for example, Dr. Chris Palmer and Dr. Georgia Ede, if we look at, their theories of how this is working and the works of Dr. Ian Campbell and the likes, it's pointing to a lot of different mechanisms. And so when we go back to what I was saying at the beginning, me just finding those 53 mechanisms, and I could have kept going, but I didn't. So I think there isn't just one mechanism here. And I think perhaps the mechanisms may differ for each illness. But what I can say is the ones that we are quite sure about that there is a mechanism there that can be helped by this approach is, inflammation, for example, which we know is helped by the presence of ketones. Then we have the removal of ultra-processed foods, which means that we're getting rid of, these chemicals in these foods that you and I would probably not quite call foods. So removing those is going to be beneficial. By reducing the carbohydrates, we have that lowering of blood sugar. And so the lowering and the regulation of blood sugar kind of helps us to feel stable and calm with less ups and downs through the day. So that's a contributing factor. The switch away from carbohydrates and over to fats and proteins, like you said, fats and proteins are essential for life. Carbohydrates, there is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. And so by removing the carbohydrates, you're having more fats and proteins, which means maybe our body can, work more efficiently because we're getting more of what we need and less of what we don't. Then with the increase in fats are essential for hormone production. So that's another thing. Nutrition deficiencies could be resolved by the switch over to good nutrition as well. And then finally, what was the other thing I was going to say? I think the presence of the ketones. So with the presence of ketones, those little ketone molecules themselves have so many beneficial mechanisms that kind of play into so many areas of the body, including improved energy. So cleaning up our mitochondria or improving the health of our mitochondria at a cellular level, which can sound kind of woo-woo and scary and kind of confusing, but actually there's a lot of good research now and people kind of pulling this story and picture together to show that the ketones are helping to improve the health of our mitochondria and therefore the energy that we have, which helps our brain to function, helps our organs to function, helps us to function day to day. And so that's just a couple that we've kind of touched on, which makes it very difficult to pinpoint one. And I think that's why I decided to do the study the way I did, because rather than look at one mechanism to see if it worked, instead we've gone the long way round, figured out that it can help people, and now we get to work backwards. So we can still help people now by implementing this low carb or ketogenic approach, or just simply cleaning up the diet to help them now because people need help now, and then work backwards to find, okay, what is the mechanism or mechanisms that's at play here? What can we identify and how can we join the dots to figure out why people are improving in the way they are? Does that kind of help to answer your question in a
It does,
roundabout way,
but
I suppose?
it does. But I already knew that
Yeah,
everything that I mentioned is actually, it all comes together so beautifully.
exactly.
It's all the
Yeah,
same thing, really.
yeah,
Um,
it is.
so, okay, you alluded to this earlier on, and I was
Mm,
glad you mentioned this word. This channel is called Low Carb and Fasting. So we cover the low carbohydrate diet and how positively it can impact mental health disorders. How about fasting? You
mhm.
you mentioned the word fasting earlier on, so I thought I'm gonna ask about fasting too.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you know, and as your viewers and listeners know as well.
Fasting. Let's talk about fasting.
Yeah, so yeah, I did mention it earlier, and well, fasting's been around as long as humans have been around. I think we can both agree on that, right? What's interesting is fasting has been used in so many ways through so many religions over so many hundreds and thousands of years. And back in the 1920s, the reason why the ketogenic diet actually came about is because they found that children who had epilepsy, when they were fasted, their seizures dramatically decreased, the amount of seizures they were having per day. And so obviously you can't fast indefinitely because you'll disappear. So a doctor found that by applying the ketogenic diet in the way that it's formed to children, they were able to mimic the effects of fasting. So in other words, they were able to reduce the amount of seizures these children were having per day, but yet still give them nutrition, still give them calories in order to be able to function and maintain their life. And so when we think about fasting on the whole, fasting has incredible therapeutic effects, as you know. And, there's a lot of talk and a lot of research about, what's the best type of fasting to do and how long should I fast? And really, it depends on the individual, and it depends on their schedule, their lifestyle, and also what they're looking to do. Are they just looking to maintain their health? Are they looking to treat an illness? Are they looking to improve their mental health, their physical health? And there is research out there now to show that different types of fasting protocols help with different things. And I think that research, that bucket of research is only going to grow over the coming years as people get more and more interested in it. The nice thing is that once people move on to a low carbohydrate or a ketogenic diet, naturally, like I said earlier, the cravings and the appetite drop, and it becomes very easy to naturally fast without having to force anything. And so within a couple of weeks, you can start to fast and, a couple of hours, 12 hours, 16 hours, even longer if needed, or if you want to, with quite impressive improvements in different illnesses and different areas of health. And so I think it's an extremely powerful tool. What I also like is the fact that fasting is free, that you can do it whenever you want. If you're in a sticky situation, you're traveling and you don't know what to eat because there are no low carb or ketogenic options, it's okay. You can fast. You might not want to, right? Because food tastes good, but you can fast and you'll still be able to stay, on track and still stay on the path to your health goals. So I think it's a fantastic adjunct to our low carb or ketogenic or ultra processed food free lifestyle, bringing in the fasting every now and again, because by fasting you increase ketones, you reduce your inflammation and so on, and so having those ketones around is really going to stand to you during that period of time. So definitely I think it's an incredibly powerful tool as long as it's used correctly and people are educated on how to do it and they don't just jump in at the deep end and feel rubbish for a couple of days. You have to kind of ease your way into it. Definitely.
Did you find that any of the participants were doing fasting, without intending, but they just weren't hungry, so they were skipping meals, or they were just not having snacks and just having 2 meals? So fasting kind of happens naturally to
Exactly.
most people. So did you find that they were fasting inadvertently?
In the people that I spoke to, so the people who did the ketogenic diet, I think 7 out of 9 of them spoke about that. So some of them they found that just naturally they had no hunger and no cravings, and they were quite surprised because previously they had been, quite big eaters, or they would often every couple of hours need chocolate bars and this type of thing. They need that sugar energy. And they found that within a few weeks that just all kind of disappeared, and they didn't feel the draw anymore. They could just walk past the chocolate bars and it wouldn't be a problem. Whereas previously it had always been a problem. They would hear it talking to them and telling them to eat them, from the back of the cupboard. And so definitely there was a reduction in the appetite and cravings. And they also mentioned that they had moved to either 2 meals a day or 1 meal a day. So the people who had moved to 1 meal a day, I will say that they were focused more on losing weight and losing fat. So they felt that it was easier for them in their schedule and their day to move to one meal a day because they didn't have much hunger anyway, and it was helping them with their weight loss. And then the people who were eating 2 meals a day, they found that it was just easier logistically to do that. And they were quite satiated and quite comfortable with that amount of food, that they didn't feel they needed to add in a third meal. And actually, quite interestingly, they said that they just didn't want to have to make another food decision. They didn't want to have to make another meal. They were quite happy with just the 2 meals that they had being delicious, and that was enough for them. So yes, definitely it did come up, and it happened quite naturally for all of them.
Interesting, right?
Mm,
It's also the preparation. It saves you so much time to prepare
definitely.
the food, then to do all
Mm,
the cleaning up. And by
yeah,
the time you sit back and, get on with something else, it's time to eat again. It's like
yeah, exactly.
we're
And I think you find that kind of, once you're following low carb or ketogenic diet, and you just don't have those cravings or that hunger, when you're doing your work on a day-to-day basis, you have just this stable energy that you almost, it sounds ridiculous because I remember beforehand I never thought it was possible, but you do kind of forget to eat, or it's not, you don't have that intense hunger where you need to eat something straight away. You just have this sense of, oh, I could eat something now. Yeah, I guess I could, but it's not a big deal. You'll just eat when you get home, or you'll eat when it's convenient, when you eventually get to your house so you can cook your food. It's not an immediate need. And so it's very different to when you're eating higher carbohydrates and you need to have something straight away.
Mhm.
So it's very easy to fast in this respect.
Yes, is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're diabetic, for example, right, and your blood sugar had risen after your, I don't know, Greg's
Greg's
sausages,
pasties.
because I used to eat those. I
Yeah.
actually used to eat the cheese ones because I was vegetarian for a very long time, but no longer vegetarian. But I, I didn't think about the impact on my blood sugars
Exactly.
because I was
Exactly.
just told you should be able to cover it with insulin. However, we're deviating now. You can't
Yeah.
cover it with insulin. You're not going to be able to do that. So once I learned that it's
Mhm.
virtually impossible to cover the blood sugar rise,
Yeah.
um, and the insulin sort of peak, it's
Yeah.
impossible to match the two. I thought, okay, now I know. Now I know not to eat those carbohydrates. But nobody had told me that, I was always under the impression I wasn't smart enough. I hadn't found the formula that would work for me.
And I think, you're not alone in that feeling. And that's not only for, I think that's for everybody, really. I think anybody who has any health issues or any struggles with weight or anything like that, or any body issues or anything, I think that's the same feeling that they have is, you know, everything just seems quite difficult. Why is this not working for me? I'm doing everything that I've been told to do. Oh, you know, like it's just me. I'm weak. I
Mm,
can't do it. I have no discipline. I have no willpower. It's not about those things at all, and once somebody comes along and tells you, listen, like there is a different way to do this. Here's the research, here's the evidence. I can make this easy for you. This is what you need to do. Get the support that you need, like you mentioned earlier, and you can do this. It gives you back that sense of agency and that kind of sense of hope that, maybe it's not me. Maybe this is a biological thing. Maybe I can take control of this. It's not me being worthless or having low, looking after myself less or anything like that. It's very much a biological thing. Here's what you need to do. Let's get ahead and do it. And look at the difference now, removing of those carbohydrates, and things are a lot more manageable. You don't have these peaks and troughs throughout the day. So not only for you, but I think more widely for everybody, if people knew that they didn't have to have that 3 p.m. crash, they didn't have to have something at 11 a.m., just to get them to lunchtime. They didn't have to have something after dinner to help them wind down. If they knew that they didn't need that and there was a different way, you'd think everybody be running, everybody would running towards that solution.
This conversation just reminded me of an interview I did with, I don't know if you're familiar with him, Dr. Trokalajian from, from New York. And we were talking
Yeah,
about the obesity crisis.
right.
And he specifically said, who's to blame? You are not to blame. It's not your fault. It's the fault of your physicians, of your personal trainers, of your
Yeah,
dietitians, of the nurses who take care of you, because they are not giving you advice that works.
yeah,
They give
that's
you advice
exactly.
that doesn't work and then expect you to be successful at it.
Yeah. But that's exactly it. I was speaking to somebody recently and they were saying, oh, yes, you're told to exercise and then you're told to eat 2,500 calories a day. Okay, great. 25 calories of what? You know, are we talking Cocoa Pops, a Tesco meal deal with a bag of crisps and a Mars bar followed by a spaghetti bolognese? Or are we talking like eggs, bacon, avocados, nuts, seeds, courgettes, you know, eggplant, like all of these things? Like there's a very big difference between the two. And then there's the whole idea of, oh, 2,500 calories is too much for you. You need to cut it down. Well, we're looking for satiety here. We're looking for nutritionally complete, nutritionally dense food and satiety so that people are not hungry. When people are hungry, as you know, people are miserable. We're miserable when we're hungry. And so why would we make things even more difficult for ourselves? And then add the exercise and then add the fact that maybe you're a mum of three and you've got a full-time job and you're stuck in traffic 4 hours a day. It's that's too difficult. And so and then you have that whole sense of it's your fault and oh well nothing's ever going to change because I've been on a diet since I was 7 anyway. So what the heck, I'll just go and, you know, watch my weight go up and get bigger clothes and hope that everybody still accepts me, you know, when that's just not where we are right now. You know, we know things are different. It's not your fault. There is a solution, there is a way around it, and it is a lot easier in concept than we have been led to believe.
Yes.
I think everybody thinks it's very confusing and very convoluted and very scary when it's not. It really, really isn't. And when you get the right information and the right support, and you're working with peers, like you said, in groups, maybe you've got some friends who are doing it with you, it's a lot more manageable and you'll start to feel so much better. So, yeah, I think got a lot of work to do, but I just want people to know that they can feel so much better. You know, they don't need to be stuck where they are right now, both physically and mentally. You know, they
True.
can make improvements.
And even if you're eliminating obviously grains, including sort of
Mhm.
wheat and a number of other grains,
Yeah.
the number of foods you actually can eat to satiety
Yeah.
outweighs the things that you're recommended to avoid.
Yeah,
It's worth it.
definitely.
It's not as restrictive as people may think.
And also, you probably noticed this when you remove all of those ultra processed foods and when you remove the sugars, food actually tastes better. And I say that, my clients say that, I even saw that in the research. You know, people's taste receptors change or something like things that used to taste bitter, for example, dark chocolate used to taste very bitter to me. Now it tastes really sweet. You can actually taste food for how it's meant to taste. Whereas previously, you know, when you're eating a high sugar diet, everything just tastes all quite monotonous and you don't really get the flavors. So, and I don't think people believe that when they make that change, that they will actually enjoy food. But really and truly, that's what people say. They enjoy food so much more. The variety is endless. And it's not just about grab and go in Tesco, you know, or grab and go in Sainsbury's on the way to work. You can actually just, you know, put a little bit of thought into your meals. They can be quick still to put together, but they're going to be hearty meals that are nutritionally dense and taste really, really good. So, you know, it's worth it. It's worth the switch for sure.
Definitely worth the switch. Erin, we're coming close to the end of our sort of podcast. Okay, so Erin, ikrt.org.
Mhm.
As I said, the link will be below. What services do you offer?
Mhm. Yeah, so I've tried to keep it short and sweet. What I'm offering is metabolic psychiatry. So in other words, people who are struggling with their mental health, whether it be a diagnosed condition or whether it be undiagnosed, so mild symptoms or severe symptoms, people who are struggling with their mental health, I will support you to move into a low carb and then, if needed, a ketogenic diet. Implement that, help you with that, monitor ketones and so on, in order to see if your mental health symptoms improve. I have a fantastic dietitian that I work with as well, and access to some different psychiatrists if needed in order to fully support you, in terms of implementing that and tracking that over time. And things are looking quite positive actually, because, even within a couple of weeks, they say that 12 weeks is about how long you should give this a go, to see if it's going to help improve mental health symptoms. And people are starting to see improvements quite quickly, which is really, really encouraging. So we've got the metabolic psychiatry side of things, and then also got the physical health side of things. And so not so much for weight loss, but more so for people who are struggling with their metabolic health. So perhaps if they have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or metabolic syndrome, any of these issues, they can come to me, and together we'll work on cleaning up the diet, removing the ultra processed foods, moving into maybe a low carb if things are not improving, and then also the option to move into ketogenic and fasting if needed, in order to kind of help bring all of the blood levels and bring all of the markers back into alignment. And so kind of got two sections there. We've got the metabolic health side of things, and then the metabolic mental health side of things. But then of course my passion really is the metabolic mental health side of things, which is where I'm focusing most of my time. And then at the same time, I've got a couple of different webinars and educational series coming out for healthcare professionals, because, there are some fantastic courses out there right now, clinician courses, which are absolutely brilliant. And I'm hoping to kind of give a little bit of a stepping stone to those. People who are interested in learning more about metabolic psychiatry, low carb, ketogenic diets for mental health, what does that entail? Providing information and kind of education on that to healthcare professionals before they then maybe go on and say, actually, I really want to, dig into this a bit more, want to learn more from some other professionals, and they can go off and do those more clinical based courses. So that clinical course will be up probably in the next couple of months, maybe 2 months, 3 months, I think. But I have a webinar that's running every month for healthcare professionals that they can join to focus on that. So really, again, it's the integrative side. It's bringing the healthcare professionals and the research side and the clinical side in with people who want my services, they want my help, they want to be supported in this. And so that's what I'm here to do.
Erin, when you were discussing your research earlier on, you mentioned medications. You mentioned that people reported that they were not needing any more pain medications.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is now specifically about psychiatric medications.
Yeah.
Did you have any people on psychiatric medications, and did they have to come off of them during the research period?
Good question. So I did have some people who were on antidepressant medications, though there were not that many people on it. They did, however, I think 30% of those people who were on antidepressant medications did have a reduction in that over that period of time. So that's quite encouraging, though it wasn't a huge number. I mean, still moving down is better than moving up. So I'll take that as a win. And, the same thing I see clinically, over time with people's improvements in their mental health symptoms, their psychiatrists are able to taper down their medications slowly and, with the support of one another. And it's really quite encouraging to see that. So both in the research and then clinically too. Yeah, it's really quite encouraging.
Erin, we're going to wrap this up. However, let's talk about the upcoming PHC conference. And I think you're one of the speakers, am I right? Are you
Yeah.
there? Right. Tell us more about that. And I hope that, people can obviously make a trip to beautiful London for the PhD conference in May 2024 and meet Erin in person and hear her speak. Tell us more about
Yeah.
what you're going to speak about.
So some of it is still under wraps a little bit. But what I can say is that I know there's going to be a fantastic metabolic mental health panel where people will be discussing metabolic mental health protocols, how nutrition affects mental health, how diet affects mental health. And that's going to be really exciting. There's going to be lots of people there from that area of research and clinical practice. And also just prior to that, I'm not sure if you're aware or if your readers and listeners are aware, but there is also a food addiction conference on the 2 days prior to that. So you can definitely check that out online as well. That's going to be run by Dr. Jen Unwin and some other people within that field. So really it's an exciting summer, I suppose, of nutrition and mental health, food addiction, different mental health disorders, and how we can kind of approach these from a real food approach, I suppose I would say. So yeah, a little bit under wraps still. I can't say too much, but I am excited to be there, and I'm excited to, get to kind of share my story and talk to other people who have some similar stories to share as well.
Well, I'll put the PHC conference link below as well so people can find out more, because each time I check, number of speakers is increasing, and I think more detail, they're revealing more details in time. Dr. Erin Louise Bellamy, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I really appreciated it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful to sit and chat with you. Thank you for listening to me talk about my research and what I'm up to. And hopefully your readers and listeners enjoy it as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing their feedback.
Thank you very much. You have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.